I got to tell you, this workshop could be a book. It for sure probably should be a course, right? But it's going to be an hour with a half-hour yoga practice. So let's buckle up. And those of you that come to my classes usually know what that means, right? There's going to be a lot happening here, I think. All right, so welcome. So when I was preparing for this at some point yesterday, I forgot that disability was in the title. So I did this whole thing just about trauma and the subtle body, right? And I thought, oh dear, it's about disability. And at that point, I called Angelique because I want a story from Angelique as a yoga teacher. So Bethany let me know when she makes it onto the call, right? I found out that she's teaching till 11, so she should be here in a few minutes. So she's going to tell a story here too. So the thing about disability, trauma, and the subtle body, one of the lines is something like in the description is, in a field beyond mind and body, I will meet disability and trauma there, right? And so one of the things I want to try to get across is that trauma, like disability, like almost everything we have in our experience, isn't quite physical. It's not quite emotional. It's not quite psychological. It's in a field of experience that intersects a lot of them. And we've all inherited ways of understanding ourselves that may or may not be the most effective way of healing trauma. So I'm starting with terms that are disability, trauma, and subtle body, all three words that are literally indefinable, just so you know, right? There's no one definition of any of those three things. So here's my apology and my warning here, is that everyone on this call has trauma and has a hard life and has a story, right? And I'm going to try my best to speak correctly to everyone all at once, and I probably won't. I'll probably say something that doesn't feel like you feel completely included. I apologize in advance for trying the best I can. Okay? So I hope you grant me some grace on that one, because what's really hard about trauma, for example, is that there's visible and invisible traumas. What's really hard about disability is that there's visible and invisible disabilities. What's really hard about the subtle body is that it's kind of invisible, and it's not psychological, and it's not emotional, and somehow it affects it all, right? So there's no way to speak in a way that can capture how gigantic this topic is, right? But here's something I wish I was with you in person so I could sit here and go, let this be true, right? Do you know that suffering is relative? I mean, I got to go back to gallery view. Somehow I'm just looking at myself again. Okay, that suffering is relative. So is trauma. It's so funny that we get into this. Like, does anyone raise your hand if you think when you have whatever your hard life has been and your story of suffering and hardship has been, when you hear someone else and you think, oh my God, I'm not worthy anymore. I'm not really been traumatized. I don't really live with that person. Like, anyone got that voice in their head? Do you know how freaking inane that is? It's inane. It's insane. And it doesn't mean that your story is the same as everyone else's, right? Trauma, suffering is relative to your life. Take it on faith. It's kind of like It's kind of like stupid, like this, well, I'll show you mine if you show me yours. And then you go, oh, well, yours is bigger or more extreme. And suddenly I'm less worthy. It's like, that's insane. I want you to let that in. It doesn't mean there's not a whole bunch of different stories out there. There are a whole bunch of different stories, right? But no one's, because your trauma or your suffering's been, quote, from an outside view, more extreme, doesn't make you any more worthy or less worthy, because trauma, like disability, becomes even more difficult when it cuts across your physical, across your psychological, across your emotional, and enters your subtle body. Right? When it cuts across all of it and affects you as a whole. Everybody has experiences that has done that. That's how it's relative. It gets into your autonomic nervous system. It gets into your very connection to your life, right? I was in preparing for the thing today. I was thinking, how come we don't talk about traumatically happy experiences? Because haven't you had some experiences that have been so good that they don't dysregulate you, but if you look back at it, you're like, my God, my life's never going to be as good again, right? Like, what the hell, right? It's never going to be that good again. Oh my God, I think there's a baby being fed on camera and it makes me incredibly happy. So time out for a baby on the call. I like having a baby on the call. This is good, right? So the point is, typically trauma is thought to be really bad, and it is bad. I don't like that I carry so much trauma. All right. But I hope we can get across this point that suffering and trauma are relative. So what could be a possible definition of disability that covers everyone? It doesn't. There isn't one. Except I like to redefine it. As you know, if some of you have been with me long enough, you know I like to redefine it in terms of that in terms of disability, dis means, according to Dante, dis means having traveled through the world of shadow and reflection, right? So disability doesn't mean inability. It means ability that's traveled to the world of shadow and reflection, which means that it's earned ability. Disability is earned ability, which basically means it's wisdom. But you frickin' earn it. It's not for free, right? And most of us on this call, we belong in the club. Everybody in the human race belongs in the club, but they're not ready to admit they're disabled. Too bad for them, right? That's okay. So disability, off. Subtle body. I'll try to talk about that in a little bit. Again, this could be, I was hoping you'd be ready for a 6-hour class today, but I think that's probably not going to happen. So do you know, have you had a couple of experiences, and I think you have, if you're honest, like when you're super tired and you finally get into bed, but when relief cascades through your entire body? Let's say you're super, super tired and you finally get into bed, and all of a sudden you go like, it's like one massively gigantic exhale. Right? And something starts coming in and coming out, right, in you. That's the subtle body receiving, right? And I like to think about the subtle body. One of the ways that this is part of our curriculum, one of the ways that the subtle body disguises itself is through the sensation of relief. So like, for example, there'd be another really practical example I use all the time. You've all had just lame hugs, right? The polite ones, or the ones that squeeze you too hard and you feel like your stuffing's coming out, or, right? And then you have the ones that actually work all the way. And typically they include connecting from chest to chest, connects the middle part of your spine. right? That's a thing to take note of, right? But that feeling of, oh, I feel safe, I'm coming home, something cascades through your whole body, that would be a hug that gets the subtle body, right? And there's a lot of ways to facilitate that. A lot of adaptive yoga that we try to share as a sensation has a lot of trying to facilitate the sensations that come with a really good hug without it having to be a hug, right? More of me is coming online when I'm receiving support than when I'm trying to navigate with my head. So let's just call that for the time being the subtle body. And let's really let in that that's not just psychological, right? And you've had like a hug that squeezes you too tight. It's clearly not just physical either, because a hug that violates conditions of safety also doesn't cascade relief through all of your mind-body relationship. It's not just physical either. You know what's really intense is when someone has been through trauma that can't receive a hug anymore and get nourishment from it anymore. So it's not just emotional either. It's complicated in how simple it is, right? Let's call that the subtle body. And let's say that a lot of the methodology in yoga and yoga postures are trying to release the subtle body through the physical body to empower and create a sense of freedom for you mentally. That'd be one off the top of my head definition of yoga, right? Which has a whole bunch. It's not as simple as it sounds, right? All right, so let's let the subtle body go for a second for the time being. Here's a definition of trauma that is so simple sometimes that I kind of think it covers a lot. Okay. Too much or too little or for too long. Right? So that's going to cover visible and invisible, right? So let's go too much. For my case, car bouncing over my chest, breaking my back, severing my spine, breaking my neck, breaking both my wrists. Too much, too fast, right? I couldn't absorb it. I broke. I've been paying for the breaking my entire life since 45 years, right? Too little. Maybe you have a very self-absorbed parent. Maybe you've had a parent that was an alcoholic. Maybe you've had a parent that was super depressed, and you were so, or maybe you had a disabled sibling, and you never, or maybe you're a middle child, I don't know, right? That you didn't get enough of something you needed over time, right? Too little. Over time, that gets into your subtle body. The message is somehow you don't matter. Now that it gets in psychologically, what I'm interested in is when it goes past the mental and gets into your subtle body and into your body, right? Because I want to start defining trauma in terms of what passes through the first layers and lenses of how we understand ourselves into our fundamental connection to the world. That's when things start getting traumatic. All right. For too long. Right. So let's switch back for a second to disability. Right. So let's say, so this is one thing I don't even think about anymore, because there's some things it doesn't help me to pay attention to. Since I've been living since I was 13 in a wheelchair, I can't tell you the number of places and rooms in which I'm the only person in a wheelchair. I can't tell you how many times when I'm out to order at a restaurant or trying to make something happen and I'm with someone else, they don't listen to what I'm saying. They look to the other person to explain what I need, right? Let's say that's been happening, which it has on and off for 45 years. Luckily, that doesn't get through me to my sense of self-worth and start to affect how I take up space, because I figured how not to have that. But you can imagine somebody that continually comes into a space and gets social interaction that they're not worthy over too long of a time. That's going to affect the core of human consciousness. Too long. Repeated messages of not mattering, neglect would be too long. You can neglect and forget to listen to me a few times, but if you do it for 45 years, right, it's rough, right? So disability, whatever the causes of your disability, there are social interactions that over time can become traumatizing because you're never listened to. And your mind can't help but draw implications. So just trying to give you multiple examples of too much, too little, or for too long as possibly traumatizing. But by the way, we all have had all of those in our life, right? One of the things I'm a little bit uncomfortable with is how in our vernacular, we're using the word trauma all the time now, which on one level is a really great thing because we're getting more aware of the nuances. But every time somebody well-intendingly doesn't give my intelligence space in the room, it's not always meant as a microaggression, right? There are a whole bunch of reasons why things that happen, and it's going to keep happening no matter what I do. I'm going to get weirdly treated and disempowered in certain spaces. We all have versions of that, right? So yeah, life is traumatizing for sure, but be careful how you use the word. Remember, I'm a guy that believes in healing stories. Be careful the words you choose to describe. Or that, like a lot of times people think that your life is supposed to be not uncomfortable. And if it's uncomfortable, then it's traumatizing. Be careful. I wouldn't call that traumatizing until the discomfort in space starts to affect your subtle body too. Not just the shape of your mind, right? Because you get affected, right? So, all right, I could go on all day, as you can imagine. So Angelique's on the call. I think I saw her, right? So Angelique, so when I realized that there was a disability component to the thing I'm supposed to talk about today, I quickly called Angelique, who's a teacher for MBS, because she's a yoga teacher. She's not used, and I've been like throwing her under the bus for years to put her on the spot, right? Like asking her to describe things that are really difficult. And I was talking about when it is that something cuts across a social interaction when you live with a disability and gets deeper into you. So, and Angelique, your mind, when as soon as I said something like that, like, and I gave the example, everyone on the call knows what it's like to be like betrayed or full of shame, right? And that can cut across into the subtle body. But Angelique, so what was the story your mind flashed to that I could hear you pause and I went, what story is that? And then you told me this story.
Yeah, when I was, and this, I think this kind of thing happens somewhat regularly, but when I
Yeah,
was
for
in
sure.
my apartment in Minneapolis, I was coming back to my apartment, like walking down the hallway, and we had a apartment building where everybody was really nice. You always smiled and said hi to the people in your building. But this one guy I hadn't seen before. I was walking, we were just passing each other in the hallway. And he just kind of gave me this look that had some mixture of like pity and something else, like sadness or something. I don't know, like how people look at you like, oh God, what happened? And I
With a
just,
little bit of revulsion too,
something
or
like that.
something.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't
Yep.
want to say that, but
Yep.
I was, I all of a sudden was just like, oh my God, like it just hit me like I was having a good day. I was having a really good day. And it just like, it got me like right in my heart. And I went into my apartment and I just started crying. And I don't like, it just got me.
Yeah, and part of when you were talking on the phone about this briefly, and thanks for sharing that. And it's a story that we all have versions of. Everyone on the call has versions of this story, right? When she goes, man, it's funny when I'm telling you this story, I have to put my hand on my heart, which she did again here.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm curious when it got into you, and even now, this was how many years ago? This is probably
It was probably like 4 or 5, no, it's like 6 years ago, maybe.
6 years ago, and that's probably 4 or 5 years after you were injured, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And even still in the present, you know to support this part of your spine.
Yeah.
Tell me why. How? Why? I mean, like what does that do? Here where I'm throwing her under the bus again.
I know.
You know,
It's something to do with my subtle body.
you know what you now she's just blowing smoke right up my ass, right? And it's whatever, okay.
um,
But you're also still there, correct?
yeah. Yeah. I'm
Part of you still there. It got through your boundary, then
Mhm.
you're still putting the boundary on now.
Yeah.
Because in the now, you can still help protect the then.
Oh yeah.
Does that make sense to everybody? I got to go back to the main view here. Does what I just described try to make sense? You know how there are times where you need to do, like, you're in multiple planes of time when it comes to trauma. Here's the thing I want you to get: trauma, that whatever trauma is, and I like this idea of happy trauma, but I'm working on that because I don't have a lot of happy trauma, is that trauma travels backwards and forwards through time. So when she's actually telling me the story over the phone, I could hear her pause and I could hear her feel it. And any of you have a moment of shame or betrayal or something here now, or where you realize you don't fit in really deeply, and it might be when you were crossing the hall in middle school. I don't know what the story is. It got all the way through. It got all the way in. If it was just her mind, do you think she'd have to put her hand on her chest 6 years later? Something else happened. It wasn't just her mind. It's not just her memory. The memory might trigger the deeper imprint. There's an imprint that's still seeping forward. And Angelique, when you said versions of it still happen, me too, right? Disability, when you manage a disability, the over time, the way you're never quite fit in anywhere, you never quite, there's a loneliness with disability, but there's a loneliness with being a human. No one fully understands the story you're living, and it never lets up. Disability is traumatizing. Now, I can understand with my mind and psychologically a whole bunch of that's true. Part of what I want to try to get at by the time we practice is that managing the spaces in me in which this things got sticky and stuck to me. It's not just a psychological issue. So Angelique, back in that experience, I don't want to keep throwing you into it, but you felt bad. Was part of it back to, can you highlight us again? I want to see Angelique's face.
If
Are we
you,
highlighted? If I go to
yes,
speaker
you are.
view?
You can change it
Okay.
to speaker view.
So part of the experience, right? Was it also kind of the shock that, oh my God, that's how people see me every day?
Yeah, for sure. Seeing me through his eyes, and he was like everybody in that moment. Is that how people see me? Is that because when you I, anyway we work, I feel like I work really hard to try to love myself, to get used to this body, to feel good about who I am, and even
Which and then the words, by the way, um, love yourself is one of the ways we represent what might be creating space. Think about what in Mind Body Solutions. I'm talking to everybody now. Angelique, I'm about to make you describe it more, but there are all these different ways where we try, whether it's self-compassion, whether it's self-love, however you describe it. There's a sensation that occurs when you try to be kind with the woman, the version of you that was hurt by that, and the shock of realizing how you're perceived. Like one of the solves, it's not SALVE, salves, right, is love, right, or something. But that creates an energetic sensation, right? What does it do for you? Because not everyone, self-love is hard, right? What's the sensation that one of the ways into it, loving yourself more, what's the sensation that you get when you do that? Notice you just took a breath in. She believes in breathing at this level, right? It's a good strategy. Well, what does it do?
right. What does it do? I think it just allows me to I'm trying to see if somebody wants to say something. Chat so I can steal their thought.
No, this is incredibly hard. There's
Yeah,
no one description here.
yeah.
Somehow it gives you space between you and the pain of it. Somehow it gives you the acceptance to feel more whole again.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
To feel more inflated. So I'm imagining when you went back out of your apartment, back to your apartment and had to cry, because isn't it cool that you let what your brain lets water out to actually try to heal? It actually drops water to heal, right? That you had to somehow go and feel bad for this vision of yourself that isn't exactly yours, but maybe everyone has.
Yeah.
And you needed to somehow to like make space between you and that.
I feel like that thing about I feel better, like I feel like better in my skin, because I think when you don't feel good in your skin, it's like you don't fit.
Yeah.
And inside your skin, when you feel good in your skin, it's like there's a warmth, there's like a sensation of like it all, like everything's flowing, everything's
Yeah. So one of the best yoga poses I know is crying.
oh,
Right? It's
yeah.
cleansing in a way. Tell me a pose that works as well as crying to make you cleanse and go on to the next space.
That's true.
I don't know if there is one, right?
Yeah.
So Bethany or Molly, I can see some things are happening in the chat. Like, is there any comment that we should have added right here, right now?
Gail does have her hand up.
Okay, Gail.
I guess I just wanted to thank Angelique for sharing the story. And I feel like placing the hand on the chest or the heart area, what that tells me is she's aware, she's mindful. Because I feel like so often we can get that, snippet of shame or repulsion or, sadness or whatever it is that we're feeling that's uncomfortable. And then to kind of defend against that or protect ourselves. So we want to keep moving and go into something else and just like not even deal with it. And so the fact that she was able to like put the hand on the chest and kind of it's acknowledging the ouch of what happened. And it's a way for her to bring herself some compassion. And I feel like for her to then go inside and cry, she's actually allowing herself to feel the emotions that are arising with it. And to me, that's incredible awareness. And I feel like without that awareness, things are going to just stay unconscious or below that level of consciousness, and it can't be healed there. So well done, Angelique.
I would agree with the well done thing. I am curious about, and this is one of my personal takes and almost axiogram. And it's just words. I think maybe Angelique was being bodyful, not mindful. And that's part of the fundamental shift I want to make, because it's possible for her to put her hand on her chest and not have it be transformative. Right? So that she knows and is aware of herself and But when I know when she was telling the story to me, Angelique, correct me if I'm wrong, you didn't at first notice that you put your hand on your chest. It was like, oh my God, I need help here. So you just did it while you were telling the story, right?
I muted myself. I don't know if I was particularly cognizant of it. I mean,
And that's because you know how to live through your body. And that's part of what a yoga practice does, right? Having a yoga practice brings your body online as part of your processing unit, right? It redefines, it doesn't all have to be done in your head, right? And this is part of why I want you all to have a yoga practice, right? And I could go on all day about that and tell you that I think if we don't get our bodies as a more part of our consciousness, that we're probably not going to survive as a species. I could get really deep here, right? There are a whole bunch of truths and awareness that go from body to mind that we need to be more aware of, right? And we do it all intuitively all the time, right? This is not new information. You know you need your body. Your mind doesn't do so good when it's alone, right? If you're honest, that's just true. That's why it takes a village. That's why it's hard to do everything alone, all these things. Your mind doesn't do that great alone, right? All right. So I want to back up now. So thanks, Angelique, right? And we'll keep, and I don't know if there are other comments that should be read out of the chat. I don't know, but there's so much to cover here. I want to try to keep going. Is there anything in there that yells out, Bethany or Molly?
Julianne did ask if you could speak a little bit more about the asana of crying.
That was a new line that I never put together today, so no. Except if you're trying to have asana that cleanses, does anyone, when you really have a good authentic cry, does anyone feel worse? It's freaking unbelievable. So to call that an asana, right? But a lot of people's minds don't think that if they start crying, they'll get annihilated. I usually make a distinction between tears of annihilation and tears of cleansing. And one of the great movements on a healing path is when you realize that sometimes you just need tears of cleansing, and they don't always have to be that you're about to be so overwhelmed, you're about to disappear. You're not about to get annihilated, that the tears themselves are a sign that you're growing new space. And I love that symbolically we return water, right? Our brains literally let water right out of our eyes. It's so great. There's laughing yoga, there's all that stuff for sure, right? All sorts of poses. I just think that we're afraid of our own sadness too much, and that keeps us locked in place, which now I want to go back to something else, right? Grief is the processing of grief is the great transformative trick of consciousness, right? But that's for a whole other day, right? processing grief, right? But so I want to switch for a second to one of the things I would say about my own trauma, and then, God dang, this might go after hours a little bit, is it, have you noticed that it freezes part of you in time? Right? So, you know, and you can't undo whatever happened. That's the thing about when people are first having a whatever trauma it is, you want to try to, especially if it's physical, that makes it easier on one level, but like you want to go back to the time before the thing happened, right? One of the big healing moments in processing trauma is to realize you can't go back to what happened before the thing happened, right? And you figure out how to grow around it. Your mind figures out how to manage, and you kind of grow around it, but you don't realize that part of your, may I bias you, part of your space is frozen in time back in the past. It's not just your mind, it's not just your memory. Part of your space is back there, right? Whatever I mean by space, right? And so here's a couple of mine, right? So I remember hearing a story. I've worked a lot with vets, not a lot, but a decent amount, in the way they're traumatized and carry PTSD. And I remember hearing a story from a guy that had to, before he could go to sleep and fall asleep at night, he had to walk the periphery of his property, right? He must have been a guy that was in combat that, you know, needed to know somebody was watching the edges. And if he didn't do that, he could never sleep. So his grounding mechanism was to walk the periphery, right? One of my grounding mechanisms is to, in any situation, because of what happened 45 years ago on the grassy meeting, whatever, and waking up into what I woke up into, I have to kind of have a plan for what's worse going to happen. Right. And once I get, it's part of my grounding, I kind of go, oh, okay. You know, so I have this habit to look about, well, what's the worst that could happen here? Right. And I can handle that, because the worst already happened to me. So it's not like people think it's not like I want to control what's happening. I also like to know what I'm going to have for dinner. I kind of like to have a somewhat of a plan, right? For stuff. Right. So there's just things that I like, and I make it a fun thing. I kind of like to look forward to something, you know, because I already know the unthinkable is possible at any time. So here's another way it manifests, right? And this is happening lately. A lot of you know I've torn both my rotator cuffs, and they go in and out of being really sore. And every time I transfer into bed, especially late at night, I kind of have a plan of what if I fall. Right. And make sure the phone's nearby. Make sure I think, okay, where did I transfer? I'd probably go in my closet because there's carpeting there if I had to sleep. Would I call 911? Would I do this? Would I, did I go through this? Right. And the more I think about the worst case scenario right before I transfer, the more likely I am to fall in the transfer. Right. So lately I've been going through this battle of preparing for the worst case scenario as a legacy of my trauma. Right. And then knowing the more I think about it, the more likely it's going to happen. Knowing that's insane, and yet still having to deal with the vulnerability of what happens when I fall alone in my house late at night. What neighbor would I call? What this would I call? What that would I call, right? That's part of the legacy of my trauma. Whenever I see a voicemail, I worry, I think, okay, what's the worst could happen? What is Paul okay? Or my son, right? I have this idea, and it has to do with the fact that I woke up out of the coma that I was in. I literally, at an autonomic level, my polyvagal system shut down, knocked me into a coma for 3.5 days, shut off my digestion for 9 days. No, I'm just telling you how extreme mine is. Anyone thinking, oh, that's trauma, that makes me way beyond mine. No, it doesn't. I just had something more extreme, right? That I got knocked out of all of that And as I came back, I come back to my father and sister being killed. And I come back to the fact that I've never been walked again. And I take it down like a list in my head. Boom, boom, boom. Here comes the mind, the protector. Okay, I'll get this. I'll forget about being an athletic little boy. I'll be 14 going on 13 going on 41. I'll just accept this and move on. My mind kicked in to start to protect me. That's the mind that plans for the fall before I transfer. That's the mind that's constantly with me. That got imprinted into my nervous system young, right? And I carry it. Part of me got frozen. Now, that sounds really dramatic because it's so extreme. You have those moments from your life, by the way, they froze you. You've been reacting from them ever since. Trauma is relative. It's when it cuts through backwards and forwards through time. There is no comparison between your story and mine. Things shape you, freeze you, make you move forward and backward. So before it's too late, I want to show the album cover of one of my favorite dark albums of my life, Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, because I think it's really apropos about something important, right? Bethany, are you there? I've been losing people on screen. Am I alone? Is Mind Body Solutions even with me anymore? All right. So first, album cover of The Prison. What happened to it? It's gone. Sharing your screen. Okay. So white light. So what happens with trauma, in my opinion, is that whatever happens in any of our lives, everyone's got stories of this. What becomes traumatizing is a complex interaction with the world around us, right? Something comes into it, whether it's profound threat, whether it's whatever it is, something comes in. That's the white light on the left side of the screen. You're the pyramid, okay? And it comes out the other side, diffracted in light, right? Let's call the rainbow part of the prism our understanding of ourselves, our lens on whatever came into our system, which could be any cause. The white light's universal. The way we represent it to ourselves becomes varied, right? So Bethany, will you go to the other slide now?
You want the one with the words?
With the words, yep. So what's the one on top? Isn't there, can you scroll down? There it is, right? So let's, like the colors of the rainbow, let's call this what I think the different ways that we get injured, where human consciousness gets injured, right? There's a psychological effect. No one's going to deny that. Physical effect most often, but physical effect might even be someone that's got a childhood trauma that has a hard time taking up space in relationships later in their life. So they might have bad posture, they might be small, they might be the mousy person in the room because they don't want to take up space. So it's physical effect always. Of course, there's emotional stuff, right? But I think that yoga has the greatest potential to help the mind-body part of the sensation and the metaphysical part of the injury, which means the way you travel backwards and forwards in time, right? So, and by the way, yoga is going to affect all of these dimensions, right? But what's happened in our relationship to trauma, in my opinion, is that the way we're helping people with trauma is very much emphasizing, and this isn't wrong, I think the emphasis might be overemphasized, is the psychological part of the injury, is the disempowerment, the feeling of disenfranchisement, the marginalization that occurs, the loneliness that occurs when you've absorbed a huge influx into your subtle body of emptiness, right? So we tend to think that that a psychological empowerment, choice is what's essential. And for some people, it totally is. But choice without grounding doesn't create healthy space. So drop the screens on. I need to see faces. So will you stop sharing your screens? So the idea that like this idea that, well, making sure everyone's included and all that stuff and trying to get everything just right. The fact is that if my subtle body is dependent on me having choice in every context, I'm never going to get stronger, right? I'm actually going to be more fragile. So at Mind Body Solutions, we try to invest in people's resiliency before we try to make everything just right? Because there's no way to do, although I get it. And there are some people like I'm realizing the incredible choice I didn't have at the accident scene. I'm realizing that I didn't to survive. So I'm getting at a new level how important choice is, but it's not the kind of choice that's whether I have a sight line in my room, right? It's a different kind of choice. It has to do with having space, right, in me. This is where the subtle body starts to really, where a yoga practice can really help, right? Now, I'm going to say weird thing. It's not just that the body keeps the score. The body carries time. So Angelique touches herself in the present on her chest, and she's touching the space in her that got damaged. And it's not just because she remembers the space. It's not just her mind. It got in at an unexpected level of cascade. It got into her being, her subtle body, right? Now, those different colors of the rainbow, the psychological, the physical, the emotional, those are all lenses into the effect of trauma. They're not wrong. There are ways we access it, right? I think yoga has the most effect and transformative potential at the level of the sensations, right? And the backwards and forwards in time. Someone who's carrying trauma loses track of freedom in the present because they lost space in the past, right? And I need a series of practices. So there's a documentary that we're making now available free on our website as of today as a link that has to do, it's Standing Still, Still Standing. I don't know if any of you have watched it yet, but I work with a vet named Britt, and he was blown up basically in Afghanistan in a poppy field, right? And a lot of what I'm trying to do is have him be supported by the floor and have the sensation of relief cascading through his whole body while he tells some stories about what it was like when he was in the poppy field. So he can conjoin the sensation of relief from the present to the way he's stuck in the past, right? And trying to get him in this situation where the relief in the present could touch the stuck part in the past, the frozen part. Because the frozen part, when I had lunch with them and someone dropped a spoon at lunch when I was with them, the frozen part was back in the poppy seed as soon as the platter clanked. So he was in multiple planes of time, right? A yoga practice through the subtle body is going to help you reclaim your sense of space in the present, can help you reclaim space from the past so it doesn't pathologically impact your future. So is this making sense to anybody? Right? Does anyone want to make a quick comment? Because I can't stop too long because I do need to teach some yoga. Because the whole freaking point of this is to change your inward space in a way that isn't just psychological.
Matthew,
Yeah.
there was a question in the chat. If you could just briefly speak a little more about what the subtle body is.
Is?
Mhm.
For God's sakes, I've spent like the last 32 years trying to do that. Sit up straight and tall for a second. First, so I have no balance, right? So, well, I have balance, but it's not very good. If I'm not leaning against something, I'm like all over the place, right? Let's say I want to access the space in my chest, and I try to do it like hanging in space where I don't have conditions of safety. So if I try to put my hands in prayer here, there's no way I'm accessing the subtlety in my chest because conditions of safety haven't been met. For those of you that know, can you imagine all the levels I'm trying to show right now? Think through what I'm giving as a simple example. Conditions of safety must be met in order for me to access the subtle spaces. But let's say, which is also true, that I'm paralyzed from the chest down and I can't feel my feet and my legs. And somehow I want to go through the subtlety at the center of my chest, actually feel my legs more. But if I think about this too much just out here and get in a space where I'm not safe, I'm not going to have the cascade of relief through my entire system, right? So I'm going to put, looks like I'm taking a prop, but I'm going to put my elbows on the table. And I'm going to go equal from side to side. Well, right now, my elbow's on my, one elbow is on my thing for my mouse, but I don't have a mouse, right? And the other elbow's on the table, so it's not equal, but that's okay. And I'm going to start to feel the conditions of safety. And I'm going to like start to lift my, actually I feel my feet and my sitting bones because I'm actually trying to access the center of my chest. So how can I access, this is about the subtle body now. This is more complicated than you wanted. But how do I access the empty space in the center of my chest? What I'm trying to tell you is that empty space is part of what Angelique was protecting when she was back, trying to move through the perception from the outside of her as a disabled person, right? So I'm going to create conditions of safety and I put my hands together. I'm going to create the structure around it. My sitting bones, my feet, my elbows on the table that create conditions of safety. And then I'm going to take an inhalation just for a second, just to feel where my center of my chest is indirectly through the inhalation and let it out. And then I'm going to let the center of my chest be connected to the palms of my hands. And I'm going to open the palms of my hands as I open the center of my chest. When I do this well, I feel my legs more. When I do this well, the space in the room doesn't feel threatening. If I want to screw up a direct connection to the subtle body, I'm going to clench my jaw and press the tongue against the roof of my mouth really hard. That becomes my will again. So instead, I'm going to do it with softening the inside of my mouth, softening my jaw, feeling the emptiness and the fullness. And from that perspective, maybe I'm going to learn how to stretch the skin on my fingers too, not just the palms. Maybe when I connect the bones of the heel of my hands, I start to feel my legs more. And you might not feel all this because you haven't been practicing yoga for 32 years, right? But it's here. And then release. Watch what happens when you, right? Suddenly you lose connection to space around you. You do all this stuff. And what if the version of Angelique that was watching the person pass? And by the way, I liked when she said, when we walk by each other in the hall and she doesn't walk. I love that, right? And I liked that slip, right? Because I'm part of the walking world too, right? I walk. I walk through fields of exploration all the time, right? But what she wasn't ready for is that exchange and that look that most likely she had a little bit of her own self-judgment about her own body going through the eyes of the other person, right? But at that moment, it got into the center of her chest. And she carries it through time to this day, right? And so she knows when she goes to the version that wasn't ready, right? She goes here, she remembers the story. Because she is mindful and no, but her body's telling where it wants reference. For some reason, when I remember my sister, who I missed terribly, right? I remember a day that we were golfing together and she was playing so badly, she stopped playing. I was like 12 and she started commentating while I was swinging my golf clubs on the 14th hole. And she started commentating and making me laugh so hard I fell over on a sunny day on a golf course in Duluth in 1977, 78. Okay. I have no idea why that imprinted me so deeply. Not a clue. You don't get to choose the times when you're in love, right? So when I want that to be a traumatically happy experience, right? So don't just look for your bad and hard experiences. Look for transcendent experiences that don't suck. Breathe into them. Breathe out of them. Right? You're going to find you breathe into them better. If you make it just mental, if I just go back to the 14th hole at North Conoco on that day, that was a little bit chilly, and I can tell you all the things about how it did, right? If I just go there mentally, my chest collapsed and I don't get to have it all the way. If I start to go, wait, I freaking love my sister. I miss her terribly, but I love her. And I'm going to remember that day, not just, oh yeah, top down, I'm so happy about it, but I'm going to remember all the sensations and her making me laugh so freaking hard and destroying not just her golf game, but my golf game on that day because I couldn't stop laughing and feeling so goofy. And you know, she didn't love sports. So her being a sports commentator sounded really poor. She was not good at it, right? All these things are all part of the day. And I'm going to dance with that memory, right? When I miss her, I think of that and dance to this. One of the songs she introduced into my young awareness was Stevie Wonder's Superstition. There's a song and a half. Practice all your freaking stories, not just the bad ones. The bad ones will collapse your body, right? You have memories you don't even know you have, good and bad, right? But practice the good ones. Breathe into some of those too. All right, now to the yoga practice, right? And I didn't mean to go so far into such a person, but I want you to get that you're not just in the present. David White says it, the poet, philosopher David White says, it's an Irish saying, the thing about the present is it's not just, the thing about the past is it's not just the past. Turns out that the space in you that you carry in your body now, the empty space you carry now is also your time. It's not just the body keeps the score. Yeah, my body marks what happened, for sure. It keeps the score that way. It carries my whole life. My mind doesn't, by the way. My body carries my whole life, not my mind. My mind can't do it. It's too limited. All right. So sit up straight and tall. You mean there's an empty part of me that is like way freer than you think? The empty part of you that your mind tends to dread? Because sometimes when you go there, it starts to want to cry and feel like it's broken. Yeah, you know, that part of you. Yeah, that's here. That's okay. Right. So I'm going to let that part in as I ground my forearms on the table. Right. As I feel grounding. If you've been coming to my classes, you know, I've been talking about time travel and dimensions and other dimensions. And turns out that the transcendent part of us, I think, is probably more connected to the autonomic nervous system. You need to get more connected to the parasympathetic part of the nervous system. Being more aware of exhale, being more aware of inhale, of the empty space. There's a calming energy that's never not with you. Shavasana is in every pose. Shavasana feeds life, not just death. So what you're learning in an asana is how to get the empty part of you part of the work. That's why pratyahara is one of the limbs. So put your lips together, teeth slightly apart. I don't need just choice. I need grounded choice. I just don't need psychological empowerment. I need wholeness. Notice the breath come into your rib cage. Like one of the intersections that I think is most vital in your configuration is where my inhalation nudges into my rib cage and therefore feeds my spine. So as you inhale, feel how the ribs carry a force that goes right into your spine. And it does so more on the back side of your body. Let your rib cage expand on the inhalation and then lengthen your spine on the exhalation, right? So to help you do that, inhale, feel the expansion into your spine, and then on exhale, hit down through your sitting bones and stretch out to the top of your head. To help you do that, you might exhale from your back ribs as if they're coming forward. So take in the world. By the world, the universe will never deny you, actually. Right? So you take it in, and then you appreciate it, and then you exhale into action in length. Right? So keep repeating that process. For those of you that know what Ujjayi breath is, you can kind of see why that vibration helps you connect to your midline. I tend to overindulge in the midline on Ujjayi breath, so I need to feel more of the expansion on the inhalation. And then ground it through the vibration that was always there, whether or not I made the sound in the back of my nose, throat. The sound was always there. So everybody's got hurt, right? You don't even have to remember a hurtful story right now. just let your body be there too. Your mind's not as strong alone, just so you know. Trauma's not just psychological. Let's take up some space. But I want to take up space with my chest lifted. So I'm going to take my arms wide. I'm going to hit down through my sitting bones. So here it's really hard for me to lift my chest because I'm not on as good a balance. So now I'm going to take my arms down. I'm going to come forward onto my thighs. So when I lift my chest, I can touch the sky with the center of my chest, right? But I'm gonna, and remember, I'm trying to weirdly open to all of my times, right? So I'm gonna hit down towards the earth because I never want to lose grounding. I'm gonna allow that big chunks of my life have sucked. My mind doesn't have to go there. And I'm gonna vibrantly rise it. I'm going to smile across my collarbones because shit, I'm actually, at the end of the day, if I get out of my mind, I'm pretty happy to be alive. I'm going to broaden between my shoulder blades, right? I'm going to roll my shoulder blades back. And now I'm going to take my gaze, but I'm going to anchor it in the center of my chest. I'm going to lengthen and look up and let in the light right through me. And I'm going to release. I'm going to go back to that little space that's collapsed and know, why do I live so much in my life from my little space? Take a breath here and go, I don't want to. Am I keeping some of you awake? Someone just gave a great big yawn. I saw it, right? So how come we manage so much of our life from our little space? That's because your mind thinks it's in charge, right? Your mind will make you be in little space. I'm going to ground again. I'm hitting down, right? I'm starting to hit down to my shin with my feet. I'm going to smile under my collarbones, broaden the space between my shoulder blades, making my spine more active. I'm going to start to look up, upward facing dog, right? But actually, I'm trying to have all of my time as I take in more light, right? And I'm going to let the light touch all of me and then release, come back down. I'm going to inhale, take my arm up, and I'm going to grow up and down. I'm going to try to make my tree trunk, by rolling my tricep in, go more firmly into the ground, roll my upper arm in. I'm going to hit down through my sitting bones, down through my feet. I'm going to wiggle my fingers at the very top because why wouldn't I? I'm going to exhale. I'm going to dynamically twist and squeeze some of the empty space I've been carrying too much in a deadened way, right? Some of the empty space, I'm going to squeeze it through my spine, but gently with self-love, whatever, in other words, don't squeeze it too hard, right? Inhale, lift up, exhale, revolve. Lifting under the collarbones, making sure I'm taking the light in of the room. I'm letting it be part of it. This is the kind of magic you get to do in your own practice that you never get to do in class, right? You get to let all of the space touch all of your life. Good, and then come on back to center. And if you do this enough, you don't always have to feel bad to get to these spaces, right? Right? Have the spaces. Have your times, right? You don't always have to get here by feeling bad, right? You get to have them all with you because guess what? They're already here. Right? So you're making sure that all this comes in, there's something dynamic. Supposedly, I think there's some truth to this. Twists help grieve. Why? Because it wrings out dead and empty space. Inhale, lift up, exhale, revolve. But it's not like the twist does it. You got to open and let all of your times get dynamically ringed out like a dish rack, right? Because you're letting all of your time move with your spine, and then come on back to center. Now, when you practice time travel in your yoga pose, don't just listen to all your shitty stuff. So I'm lifting up and down, right? I've actually had some remarkably good things happen in my life. Who said the subtle body is only accessible through the shitty experiences? It's not freaking true. It's part of the great lie. Right? So I'm lifting up and down, and like, there's goofiness here, right? Like a couple classes ago, I was trying to teach about how to skip while you're paralyzed, right? Do you remember why you used to skip as a kid? The goofy shit you did when you were a kid? Yeah. What the hell? Why ain't I doing more than that? More than that, more of that, right? Right. So they say if I can let the center of my chest touch more of the space around me, I'll have a less of a tendency to be depressed. I don't know. Doesn't seem like it's going to hurt anything. Back bends apparently help depression. Can I just do enough back bends and I'll never get depressed? False. Doesn't work that way. Am I going to let light into the center of my chest on this next back bend while keeping it active? Yeah, I can do that. Can I let it be more than just this pose? Yeah, I think I can do that. I'm going to laugh and I'm going to rock my whole life in here for a second. And then I'm going to put my hands on my thighs. And I'm going to push down and find the earth, because the earth never freaking leaves you, by the way. It never hasn't been here. Ever. Right? In your whole existence for you. I'm going to go back. I'm going to push on my legs. I'm going to lengthen. I'm going to rise up over the back of my chair, but I'm not just thinking about how far I can bend. I want this part of me way in here to receive the light from around me, right? So I'm going to go back, I'm going to open, and I'm going to start to really do some work now to get this more open. So I'm going to broaden across the collarbones, roll the shoulders back, go up and over the chair, feel my feet, extend from the inner groin to the inner knee to the inner heel, activate, open, and then remember to receive. Good, and then release. Come forward. Come back to the earth. Find the ground. Find the slinky snake that is your spine too, right? Engage it. Cobra pose, not upward facing dog. Find sensual strength out of the earth. Breathe. Transition it. Ground your legs. Push. Start to watch the gravity shift. Now, instead of having so much emphasis on the center of my chest in this back bend, I'm going to do something that's even harder for me. I'm going to try to have my tailbone go towards the sky like upward facing bow. I don't even know how I'm going to freaking do that. I'm going to go back. I'm going to hit. I'm going to take some time as I push my legs away here. I'm going to rock back and forth a few times. I'm going to like get that rhythm in there. Like, hey, what if I do that? I'm going to start to, and I can't physically lift up, but I can kind of let something start to emanate up out of from my tailbone. Whatever that is, I'm going to go with it. In fact, I'm going to stick my hands in my butt here for a second, and I'm going to shoot myself up for a second with the back of my hand. I'm going to give my brain the sense of movement that I can't do. I kind of like that one. Pushing on my own ass here, I like it, right? Then I'm going to come back. I'm going to ground and go, gotta remember that. I can go forward and backward in time, right? And I'm going to go back, and I'm going to, as I push my legs away, I'm going to, right here, before I get too far into it, I'm going to try to rise my tailbone towards the sky. Now, if I try to do it too physically, I can't do it. If I try to do it emotionally, like rise your chin, your tip, that doesn't work either. I got to go to a zone I don't understand and use rhythm here. Rhythm and grounding. So I'm going back and forth. I hope you can see me moving. I'm going back and forth, right? I'm going like, hey, wait. And then I'm going to go for it in a second, right? And go up and over. And then I got to create the conditions and trust that the core of my energy can move skyward. Then open my chest. Breathe. And then release. Ooh, I better come back to earth. I don't know about you, but I just got dizzy. Not too bad. It also dried my mouth out, right? Which means I got my autonomic nervous system just freaking firing. More of me just went into that one. So I'm rocking back and forth to find home again, right? All the while, I'm laughing with all my ages, right? I remember when I was having a lot of flashbacks when I first started yoga, and I'd tell my yoga teacher about it, and she'd listen and listen to me ramble, and then she'd say eventually, Matt, just shut up and do the poses. Just freaking move your body. Just remember the time that Angelique was in, and then put your hand on her chest. Just shut up, right? Your mind needs to shut up. You need to feel more. I should tattoo that. If I ever had a tattoo I would get, it would say, shut your mind up, let your body feel more. Right? Inhale up. Exhale, revolve. Arm behind you. I like to think of a sprinkler behind my back, shooting water out the back of my spine. Like I'm throwing it. Like, remember when you're a kid playing and would run through the sprinkler when you were a kid? And you fling it around. I like to do that out my back of my spine when I do a twist, when I'm trying to make it more joyful. I think about water and opening and turning. Find your own image. I like that one. Good, and then come on back together. But I do like to think of the sprinkler in terms of the kid in me, right? So I remember how to bring the kid into my yoga practice. Not just the serious freaking yogi that tries to make the adult yogi that tries to make everything so freaking serious. I want to find the other part. Inhale, lift up, exhale, revolve. I'm throwing my sprinkler on, and I might be, wasn't it really fun to put the sprinkler on your like brother or sister or friend? Squirt them, right? That's right. And they get the shock of it. That's right. Come back to center. Find all of your ages when you practice yoga. Don't do it every time. Don't do it every time. It's exhausting. If I have a practice where I practice all my ages, I can do that once in a while. I can't do it every time. I better take a few breaths. I better let myself ground a little bit. It's exhausting traveling through all my life, even with sprinkler heads. Right? Wait, did I just let the center of my chest touch the sky? Did I just try to jump my tailbone towards the sky? If I told anyone this, especially my family, they think I'm insane. That's all right. I got you all. We got each other there. Find your own ways to practice your whole life. Just reclaim your space. Reclaim your space. And don't just do it through tears. So I'm being symmetrical. I want to find the midline. So I got my arms on the table, each sitting bone, each foot, each side of my shoulders, balance my head over my neck, because I'm preparing for the quieting part. Oh my God, this practice just knocked the saliva right out of my mouth. I am thirsty. In fact, faux pas. Shit, I love water. Couple inhales, couple exhales. Then I'm going to collapse and let my chair hold me up. I'm going to let the nourishment in, the hum in. Soften the inside of your mouth. Lips together, teeth slightly apart. I don't know why my mind is afraid of the beautiful stillness. I can touch the stillness and I can breathe. I don't want to do a full Shavasana because I have more to say as we wrap up. Start to bring yourself back, slightly deeper inhalation, slightly longer exhalation. So one of the things that I think the realization of the subtle body, and clearly mind-body solutions is in some ways formed around this idea, is that when I connect them with the subtlety of my nervous system, if I can quiet my judging head, my judging brain down, my judging mind, right? When I connect to the space on its own terms that I embody, I'm less disabled. Fact. It transforms my mind. Fact. I'm glad for the physical part of asana because I can repeat it. Some days are better than others, right? My practice doesn't go as deep. But I can try to do it again. Or if it's just a thought experiment, it doesn't work as well for me. I don't know what works for you. You got to figure it out, right? I need grounded choice. I need to study the sensation of what it is to take up space. I need to try to not have my space be so affected by the 13-year-old boy's mind that gave up his childhood as he woke up from the coma. I need to stop thinking that the threat is right around the corner. And I got to cherish the mind that got me here. Right? So I can't be mad at it. I have to be grateful, but it's time to let it up. And the way my mind's going to let up is if I can reclaim parts of my nervous system. And the best way I know to reclaim the subtlety of the nervous system and the potential of the nervous system is asana, is breathing, is pranayama, is getting more connected to the subtlety of what's happening. But to do so in movement, not in thought. It's not just the body keeps the score. The body's the hope. It's the mind that lags behind and holds on to time. Right? It gets stuck. Anyone see that in their parents as they age, the places where they're stuck? Big time. Guess what? If they're stuck, you're stuck too. Shh, don't tell anybody. Right? All right, everybody, I'll stay on with comments and questions and after hours because that's when the real stuff happens. Right? So, but otherwise, thanks for coming for this last 90 minutes. And we should try doing stuff like this again. Come back. Get other people to come. All right. Hands together. Namaste. The spirit in me bows the spirit in you. Whatever that means, by the way. Right. All right, everybody. Keep on keeping on.